Today we're going to do a breakdown of some of the winning entries in the perfumery competition that I ran a few months ago. So if you haven't already watched the video on the perfumery competition where I go and make all the formulas and judge them and then find the winner, go look in the description. I'll put a link to that video and you can watch that video before this one. And in this video what I'm actually going to go and do is take some of those winning formulas and I'm going to go and break them down in detail as to why I think they work and kind of what the different elements of those formulas are. So, for example, if you're someone who's newer to perfumery and you're unsure, when you look at these formulas, how do you come up with a formula like that? What does it all mean? Like, how did I get there? Because it probably just seems like a load of random entries. I'm going to give what could be a thought process to coming up with those formulas. So it's not necessarily going to be what the actual person thought when they came up with the formula. It's just my take on it when I look at that formula. What sticks out to me and how would I class as different things. It's kind of like a hot take thing. And the idea is just to elucidate a little bit what could have been some of the thought processes that went on behind the scenes in order to come up with those formulas. Let's start then with the Rose of the Woods. So this was the competition winner. I thought it smelled really nice. And let's take a look at the formula. And if you watch my video on the rose, or the series on the rose, when you look at this formula, what you should immediately notice is that a lot of the raw materials entries in the formula are actually forming part of a rose accord. So if you went and had a look at this formula and you didn't know what a rose accord looked like, you might think it's a lot of random stuff in there. But if you kind of could recognize that basic structure of the rose accord, then the formula actually suddenly looks a lot simpler. So if we go and take our highlighter and we pick a color for rose, we can start highlighting everything that's the rose, or part of the rose accord. So we've got the delta damascone, that will be part of the rose accord, the alpha ionone, then the rose oxide, phenylethyl alcohol, the linalool is part of the rose accord, geranyl acetate, geraniol, ethyl safranate, which is a bit like the damascones, and the citronellol. So these all form part of the rose accord. Then if we go and look at what's left in the formula, it's suddenly a lot more simple. The one thing that really strikes me as interesting in this, and I always thought that from the first time I saw the formula, was the undecovertyl. And that's because undecovertyl is an intensely green smelling note, and it's completely different it's quite unusual, and it's definitely something that you don't use that often. So I've got undecovertyl here. And then finally everything else, we can kind of lump that into just a base note. So we've got the ambretolide, which is a musk, cinnamal alcohol, which smells a little bit cinnamon, and a little bit like maybe phenylethyl alcohol as well, which is maybe one reason they blend together in this formula. And we've got the vertifix, which is kind of like woody amber, vanillin, which is just really commonly used everywhere to add a bit of kind of sweetness. Then finally we've got galaxolide, which is a polycyclic musk. So what I'm actually going to go and do is smell all of these components separately. So firstly we've got the rose base, and the rose base, it smells very much like a nice rose base. It's pretty good. And then we have the undecovertyl. So just on its own, that smells like a very green, almost a little bit cucumber-like, intensely kind of piercing green, kind of like a leafy smell. And finally we've got the base note. So if I go and smell that, it actually is quite sweet. You can definitely smell the vanillin and cinnamal alcohol coming through, even though especially the vanillin isn't actually dosed that strongly, which I find quite interesting. It must be that some of the sweetness is coming from the cinnamal alcohol as well. And if I then take all of those three components on a scent strip, so I'm doing this behind the screen, and I hold them together and then I go smell them, instantly we've got the smell of the actual perfume. And suddenly I think it's really incredible the way that these just work together as an accord, because as soon as you put these all together, suddenly that sharp, piercing, bright green smell of the undecovertyl, it just completely vanishes into the rest of the blend, and it's not something that you would pick out. I don't think it's something you would notice if you went and smelled it. So what this shows is it's just making a really, really nice accord effect, and I think that's my favourite thing about this perfume, and ultimately why I gave it the win for the competition, because this accord is done so well. It just goes and creates kind of like this completely new smell. And the effect of the whole thing, having the sweetness from the, I guess, the cinnamon alcohol and the vanilla and the base note, the undecovertal with this kind of unique green side to it, and then this rose accord with the ironone, what they go and do together is they go and create a really nice violet accord overall. The whole kind of thing smells like violet. And I think that's because ionones are found in violet. Usually in violet you would have kind of, let's say, green notes like, I know violif is one example, but I think undecovertal is kind of similar to that. And then you've got this kind of sweetness in the bottom as well, which actually pushes it more towards Parma Violet sweets, but I do really like that smell, so that's no big deal from my point of view. So maybe that wasn't the intention with the perfume, to have it smell like violets because it's called Rose of the Woods, but nonetheless, I do really like the way that this violet accord has kind of come out. So now what I'm going to do is actually go through into the individual components, and we're going to have a little bit more of a deeper look at how those are made up. So that will be the rose base separately and the actual base note. So firstly, with the rose accord, what I've gone and done is rewritten that formula so the whole rose accord is just on its own in one place. And if we go and look at this, it's kind of hard to, on its own, necessarily work out what's going on. So what I thought would be interesting is to actually go and compare it to my rose accord, which I made in the Rose series of videos, so you can go check out that series if you haven't watched it already. So this was the accord that I came up with when I made my rose, and you'll see that there are some similarities and differences in the accord. For example, both have things like rose oxide, and they both have some form of damascone and ironone, and things like geraniol, yet also the accords are a bit different. For example, mine has things like rosafen and aldehyde C12 lauric, whereas the Rose in the Woods accord has ethyl saffronate, which mine doesn't. So what I thought would be interesting is to actually kind of do a little analysis comparing the two accords to see how they stack up, and then actually go and smell the difference. So I'm actually going to go smell them first. So I've got the Rose of the Woods rose here, and then I've got my rose. And the difference between these two accords, I think, is mine has a bit more of a spicy kind of side to the rose. It's got a little bit more of that dark side to the rose. I remember when I was building that accord, that's kind of what I wanted to go for, and it's got a bit more of like a tea-like nuance, which is probably mostly from the rosafen. So the spiciness is a bit from the eugenol, the tea-like nuances from the rosafen. And when, on the other hand, I go to the Rose of the Woods base, and I smell that, what I notice is it's actually already a bit more in a violet direction. It's a bit, it's like a bit sweeter, let's say. And I think that's mostly due to the ironone. So this one's got alpha ironone at 0.15%, and mine had alpha ironone at 0.05%. So that's actually 3 times weaker in the end. So, and because the ionones smell quite violety, that's really been emphasized in the formula. So what I've actually gone and done is I've taken the difference between the concentration of each of the components of the accords, and I've gone and plotted them out as a bar chart so we can see the differences between the accords. So if you look on the left in the red, that's where my accord has more of something, and on the right you've got where the Rose of the Woods rose accord has more of a certain element. So for example, we can see that in my rose accord we've got the rosafen, which wasn't even present in the Rose of the Woods. Then citronellol, so the rosafen is that thing that gives it, I would say, a bit more of like a rose tea kind of like smell, which explains the overall smell. The citronellol, that is a core component of the rose accord, and that's interesting that there's a lot more of that in my rose accord, because when you go to smell them, I wouldn't say you really notice that much, though I guess if you really smell into it, you do kind of notice you've got a bit more of that, let's say it's a bit of a lemony side to the rose. Then in mine you've got farnesol, which is not in the Rose of the Woods at all. This is fairly subtle. I felt it had a bit more of a light kind of petal-like smell, a bit more in the base note region of the accord. Next we have the geranyl formate, which is in my accord, and I added that because I wanted it to have that kind of like bitter side to the rose. And in the Rose of the Woods, instead of geranyl formate, we've got geranyl acetate, and that's kind of a similar thing, but it's a lot sweeter and more well-rounded. So then after that, they both got geraniol in, but again, mine had a little bit more geraniol in terms of concentration. And now we're getting down to the point though where the differences aren't really that big. So the rose oxide, they both had rose oxide. Mine had a bit more because I wanted to push that, but it doesn't seem like it really had that much of an effect. The aldehyde C12 lauric, that's a very slight change. It just makes mine maybe slightly, gives it a slight like clean sparkle, but again, that's a very subtle effect. Not really a big difference. The two Damascones, even though mine had alpha and beta Damascone, the Rose of the Woods one has delta Damascone, and these things are dosed so lowly that, again, the actual effect of these is quite similar. Then the Eugenol, even though it's quite a low dose, is quite powerful. Actually, the Damascones are powerful too, but I wouldn't say you really notice that much in the Damascones. Maybe you do notice mine just projects out a little bit more to begin with due to those Damascones. But the Eugenol you definitely notice as well, and that's because even though it's a low concentration, there's none in the Rose of the Woods, and it's got a very high impact, so it definitely provides that spiciness even at such a low level. Now, on the Rose of the Woods one, we have the Ironone, as we looked at before. It's a lot more concentrated, and I think this is really why it's got such a violet effect, because the alpha Ironone, that's powerful in the same way like the Damascones and the Eugenol. These are very powerful, so these are powerful things that are having effects at very small concentrations. Well, that alpha Ironone, if we compare it to these kind of bars in this region, compared to those, it's actually very big. And because it's just as powerful, by having dosed it just that little bit more, even though it's still small in comparison to the other components, it's actually a really strong dose of alpha Ironone, and I think that's one of the reasons that this has such a violet-y side to that Rose Accord. Then in that accord, there is linalool and ethyl safranate, which I don't think is in mine. I think that ethyl safranate makes up for me having a few more Damascones. And then the linalool, I would say it's something that you don't really notice too much. If I go to smell them, maybe it does add a slightly more herbal quality to the Rose of the Woods. And then you've got the phenylethyl alcohol as well. So again, it's like my version of the Rose Accord has a bit more in terms of the core components, geraniol, citronellol, and this one has more phenylethyl alcohol. When you actually go to smell them, if I smell them now, it doesn't actually make a massive impact, and that's partially because these elements, phenylethyl alcohol, citronellol, and geraniol, they're higher concentration, and secondly, they're still providing a similar accord effect. So in terms of accords, even if you have slightly different proportions, often the outcome can be fairly similar. Next, let's go look at the base notes. So if we go and look at the base note, the one thing that immediately jumps out at me, well, apart from the fact that the base note is quite a low concentration overall, which is quite interesting, even though it still seems to have a fair effect, is that it's got the cinnamyl alcohol and the vanillin. And if you watch my video on the Mexican vanilla and storax accords, which I kind of came up with a few months ago, you'll notice that these are two of the key components of that storax accord. And maybe this is one reason that I like this perfume so much. Maybe a subconscious thing is because I just really like that smell. That triggered something in me potentially that made me think, oh wow, this is really nice. So I think that was quite interesting there. And I think these, even these two things alone, this accord does seem to blend quite nicely with the rose. The only thing I would say is maybe having that vanillin in there, even though it's such a low amount, because vanillin is quite strong and you do notice it, it does push the rose accord a bit more into a kind of like sweets-like direction, which does make it smell a bit more, maybe a little bit more synthetic, a bit less refined, a bit kind of more like, I don't know, let's say like something for kids, or more playful, but also a bit like lower quality in terms of if you're releasing this as a fine fragrance. And I'm not against it, particularly because I think it does work well. But I also think it'll be interesting to see how this formula is without the vanillin, because, I don't know, I just have a feeling that it might smell like a bit more, well, I don't know, it might just smell a bit more like expensive, if that makes sense. I don't know that. It's just kind of a theory. So I would have to try it out, I guess. And then we've got the ambretolide, galaxolide, and the vertofix. So these are, well, the ambretolide and the galaxolide are two different types of musk, and there's just very small amounts in there. And I think that's probably just to help give a little bit of structure. And then finally, you've got the vertofix methylcedroketone. So I think what this does is really provides the kind of woody element of Rose in the Woods. Now, I don't really think that the woody side of this perfume has been fleshed out, but I think, well, with any part of this perfume, actually, if you were going to suggest improvements, I would say the base note is probably something that could use a bit of work. But I mean, overall, the perfume is really nice, right? But maybe one idea would be to actually expand on these like woody notes. So you've got like the vertofix as a start. I wonder what would happen if you started adding things like cedramber, isui super, things like that, maybe like Cephalus and Trimmer Fix. That could be interesting, or even maybe something like a cedarwood note for more of like a fresh kind of pine forest. I don't know what kind of forest they were going for with this. And then again, these musks, I think there's definitely room to experiment with having more of those. Though that said, I actually maybe quite like the idea that the musks aren't that strong in this, because I think if you're going for kind of more of a natural, let's say, like landscape impression in your perfume, then that's probably a time when you don't actually want to include too many musks, because if you're trying to make it smell like natural rather than like a kind of a perfume thing that's kind of thick with your classic things like musk and ambroxan, then you don't find those smells in nature, or at least in day-to-day life, when you're outside. So having kind of those more green notes like the Undecovertal that we saw in the formula, I actually think that that's a good side to it. So maybe you don't even need the musk at all. I don't know. It probably does serve some kind of purpose in there. So yeah, I think overall, like the base note, it works quite well. And that said, I also think you could change this base note a lot and do some interesting kind of things with the perfume. I guess part of it would be, is it just that cinnamon alcohol that's working so well as an accord with the other things, and maybe that vanillin to kind of emphasize the violet, or actually is it all of these things in here? So I guess, again, there's a lot of more experiments you could do to see just where you could go with the base note, because I think that is probably the most, let's say, kind of like the biggest prospect for different things you could do to try to improve this perfume even further. Right, so now let's look at the Trendseeker base note. So I've got that base note in front of me right now and I'm smelling it, and it's quite nice. And what I would say it basically smells of is, it's kind of like a kind of men's aftershave kind of smell that's quite fresh. And it's departed a bit from a classic kind of fougere smell, and instead it's much more of a kind of aquatic, cleaner kind of smell. And I think it's quite nicely balanced. So let's go and have a look at the formula, and let's go and see what's going on. So the thing about this base note accord is, I think what it's trying to do is specifically go for an earthy and aquatic kind of base note. So if we go and look at all the raw materials inside of here, what we can go and see is we have got, so actually I would say a couple of materials which give it its earthy note, and those are probably the cashmeran and the clearwood. So clearwood is similar to patchouli, which is quite earthy, but it's a lot cleaner, and cashmeran is kind of, I would say it's somewhere between like a musk and geosmin almost. It's kind of like an earthy smelling musk. So you can see that there's quite a reasonable amount of cashmeran actually in the formula. So especially when you've put this on the scent strip towards the more beginning of the base note, the cashmeran is definitely a bit more dominant. So you could kind of say it leads into the base note with this earthy facet. So for these two, it's almost 2% between them. You've got the 1.12 of the cashmeran and 0.45 of the clearwood. So that's quite a reasonable percentage of the base note, but these things aren't too overpowering. I think cashmeran is fairly strong, but I think the idea behind this was to give it quite a cashmeran character. Next then, let's look at what's actually constituting the bulk of the formula. So if we look, apart from that cashmeran, the first three entries are the Hedione, Timber Silk and Veramos. And between them, they're making up, I would say, something like 11.5-ish% of the formula. So these things provide a fairly big chunk, and they're not really contributing to this particularly earthy or aquatic or something like that, their character. What I think they're doing in the formula is actually providing kind of like a base structure to build off. So a lot of people might call these workhorse materials, especially the Hedione and the Timber Silk, which is just a different type of Isoe Super. So if we go and take those, we can go and highlight those as well. So I'll put those in a bit of a lighter grey. So these ones, this is what you could call like the workhorse or the base structure. So those are kind of like the foundations of such. It's like you could almost take those elements and you could go and start building anything on top of them to build any kind of generic base note. And what these kind of things kind of do is they kind of help it, especially with the performance. So they help it do things like project, and they kind of provide like, that nice smelling kind of base in the background. So whatever you put on top of it will kind of slot in as such. So next, after that, what we've actually got is a load of ambery or woody amber materials. So I'm going to go and take those. I'll highlight them in a woody amber colour. So I'd say Cephalus counts as that. Versofix, Cedramber, and Trimifix. So I would put these all under woody ambers. So the reason these work so well, I think, is that they act as a bridge. So you first got that kind of those earthy notes, which kind of, they're firstly what is giving the first kind of set or level of character to the kind of, let's call it workhorse materials, so the Hedione, Timber, Silk, Veramos. And then we're going to do the woody amber. This group, this melds really well with these workhorse bases. They're, again, quite, I would say they're quite in the middle. And what these really do is they provide this kind of, quite a nice balance in the middle of the formula. And what they do is they act as a bridge to the actual ambery notes. So let's put amber. So the ambery notes are the ambroxan and the Fixator 505E, which is a base by Firmenich. Now these, you can see they're actually a lot lower concentration, but the thing about these is they're actually a lot stronger. And these are basically ambergris notes. So they're there's an animalic raw material called ambergris, and it's been used in perfumery for a long time, and it gives you could say it gives things this kind of certain like ambery quality, which is a bit of like, maybe I would say like a golden or kind of sparkling kind of marine quality. You'll notice it if you smell especially ambroxan. And these amber notes, they really sit well with these woody ambers. Yet these woody ambers are a lot closer to kind of workhorse materials, even though ambers you would use all over the place as well. So between the workhorse, the woody ambers, and the ambers, you've got kind of a really nice base structure. And especially having a bit of ambroxan here, like 0.34% in the absolute, I think that's quite a nice concentration where it doesn't really make itself prominent, but it just boosts the perfume a little bit. Now, because we've got these ambers in now, amber, I find, especially in the context of kind of ambergris, kind of gives you this bit of a marine note. It actually has a bit of a kind of watery marine element to it. And I think in this formula, what's actually happening is now we've got these aquatic notes, so we've got the helional and the calone. These actually bridge really well from the amber. So the whole perfume, in a sense, is kind of like a line. You've got this basic structure of like the workhorse, and we've kind of coloured it with earthy notes because that's one of the, let's say, like one of the characteristics we want in the base. And you could have stopped there and you could have just made an earthy base note. But then what we've gone and done is we've fleshed out that structure with some woody ambers, and then on top of that, that's provided like a perfect kind of bridge through to actual ambergris style ambers. And then finally we've gone and got these aquatic notes, and these fit perfectly with those ambers. So we've kind of got this continuity where everything's kind of fitting with the thing next to it. And I think that's one of the reasons that maybe everything in this formula sits really well together, and they've got quite a nice accord because you don't have anything really clashing. They're all kind of seamlessly blending into one another across the categories. So the other thing to note about these aquatic notes is if you go and look at the concentration, they're really, really low. So the calone is the lowest concentration thing in the base note, at only 0.15%, and helional is also pretty low. And the interesting thing about this is when you go and smell this on the scent strip, I would probably say that the most prominent notes are the aquatic notes. So what's going on here, you may ask? Well, this is just because aquatic notes in general are quite loud and they're quite strong, quite powerful, especially the calone. So even though you've got a lot less of it in the formula than something else, it shouts a lot louder. So if you took this whole formula and you somehow had a way of measuring the perceived effects of these raw materials, you'd probably put calone somewhere right at the top above everything like Hedione and Timber Silk, because even though these things are high concentration, they're actually very subtle in terms of their smell. They just provide this kind of, let's say, this almost imperceptible, it's not imperceptible, but it's quite a soft, subtle base And the cologne, on the other hand, is a very distinct kind of like colourful note. It's got its own character, and this is imparted quite well on the perfume. So you could even go a lot lower with the cologne if you actually wanted to have just a slight aquatic element and you didn't want that to be one of the main themes of the base note. You could have it really low, something like maybe even 10 times less than that would probably still work. But anyway, so this is what I think this base note is doing quite well. It's balancing those levels, so even though it wants the cologne to be high, it wants these aquatic notes to be like a big part of the formula. What a new person might do, or someone who's not as experienced, might think, well, because I want the aquatic notes to be powerful, I'm just going to make them really strong. So they might say, oh, I'm going to have the aquatic notes in at like 1% or 2%. But if you go and do that, what you'll find is that these aquatic notes can be so powerful that they completely dominate and make the formula actually a bit sickly smelling and also a bit one-dimensional. By having balanced these down here to these kind of low amounts, what the person has done is they've managed to still highlight them and make them the most prominent notes, but now they're at a place where they actually are balanced by the rest of the base note. So in this case, they're balanced out by these woody ambers and the rest of the structure. So when you actually go to smell it, you smell quite a nice overall smell with a clear aquatic facet when you try to notice it, but it's not something that actually kind of just jumps out on you and you think the whole thing just smells really, really strongly of aquatic notes. It's done in a very balanced way. Okay, so now let's go look at the Blue Jeans base note. So when I go smell that base note, I think this one is really nicely balanced. And when you go smell it, what it really smells of mostly is it's got this kind of musky smell to it. And it makes you think of kind of like a hot iron musk or that kind of thing. And it's also got this kind of sweetness that's very subtle in the background. And if you really smell into it, you can notice that it's got this kind of, actually a little bit of, I would say almost a cherry kind of character. And again, yeah, so this base note is really, really nicely balanced. So if we now go and have a look at this, what immediately strikes me in this base note is the kind of use of, let's say, cherry / heliotropin notes, so I'm going to call them kind of pink notes. So we've got the veratrildehyde, and we have the alpha isomethylenone super, so that's kind of violety. I would class that as kind of pink as well. Then we've got the heliotropin base, so heliotropin is a floral note, but it kind of has a cherry-like, I would say, smell. Then in this this category we've got the veratrildehyde, which is it's a high concentration, but actually I find that with veratrildehyde it's actually a very weak smell. So just because it's a high concentration doesn't mean that it completely overpowers or anything. It just means that veratrildehyde needs to be that much of a high concentration to actually start impacting as one of the notes that drives the character. Whereas on the other hand, alpha isomethylenone super, that is very strong, so even at 0.19%, it still imparts a pretty good contribution to the overall kind of smell, and it definitely adds to that, to the overall smell. Now with these kind of pink notes, so I would say that's probably one of the main kind of, let's say, themes driving the character of this. We've also got the hedione in here, which not only is something that's often used as a workhorse material to provide a lot of projection, but it also is a kind of floral material as well. So that boosts this kind of, you could say it's violety, heliotropin-like, cherry, that kind of thing. It boosts that. And then I would also put the coumarin in this category, and this is included in a very low amount, so I don't think you really notice it that much. But to me, you could, out of all the kind of classes you could unpick from this formula, I would put coumarin in this simply because coumarin has this kind of, let's say it's got this kind of sweet aspect to it that is similar to things like cherry, in the sense that it's a bit similar to things like anisaldehyde. If you go and smell coumarin, then you smell anisaldehyde. You can smell some similarities, and anisaldehyde smells a lot more like cherry than coumarin. So you will notice that if you go and smell it. So we've got these kind of, what I'm going to call these kind of pink notes. Now out of these pink notes, One of the prominent ones is that alpha isomethylenone super that's also found in the Grosjean accord. The Grosjean accord, actually 3 of the elements are in here. You've got the hedione, alpha isomethylenone super, and then we've got the isoe super. And actually the last one would be galaxolide, but I actually find, when we did the musks video, we saw that galaxolide was fairly similar to tonalide. So you could actually say there is a variant of the Grosjean accord in this perfume. But that alpha isomethylenone super, that is fairly prominent in the smell. It's still, it's a little bit subtle, but it's there. And I find the ionones have a little bit of a powdery side to them as well. And you'll notice here that out of all of these other things, there are some powdery kind of like musks in here. So I do think a powdery element has been emphasized to some extent in this. So let's say powdery. But when I say powdery, a lot of people have different interpretations of what that means. We could also call it maybe like an orris-like note or something like that. So let's go highlight these ones. So we have as well as this kind of alpha isomethylenone super, which kind of blends into this kind of powdery, musky kind ofness. We've got ambretolide here, and velvione, which I would say are on the more kind of powdery side, let's say, of musks. So these are kind of musks, but they kind of fit with that theme as well. And also, you could say that the ionones are similar to the isoe super, so that's kind of one of the reasons that isoe super and ionone blend well together. Well, as we say again, there's that whole kind of Grosjean accord going on there. So, in terms of that Grosjean accord, these other 2 elements, I would actually say they kind of almost constitute as well a bit of like an ambery facet to the perfume, and that's because isoe super is kind of like a woody amber molecule. And then tonalide is more of the animalic kind of musks. It's more on the animalic side of things. So, because things like ambergris are like animalic materials, we could say that maybe that's going to count as like in the amber. I'm trying to simplify it a little bit. And again, this is kind of like a hot take on the perfume. It's not necessarily like, oh, the perfume works exactly because of this precise, this material's in that category and this is in that, and that's why it works. I'm just kind of trying to let's say, simplify it a bit by kind of providing some kind of model on which we can just start to look at it. So I'm kind of trying to create a lens through which we can look at the perfume, but obviously you could do that in different ways. So I'm going to say we've got this kind of ambery side of the perfume, and because it's got the tonalide and the isoe super, that fits naturally as this kind of Grosjean accord with these 2 elements, the isomethylenone and the hedione, and yeah, so we've got that there. And then so let's mark that down as well. It's got this kind of woody amber. We also had a powdery note as well. And then, so we've still got other musks in here though as well. And I think that, so habanolide is definitely this kind of hot iron musk, which is actually quite prominent. And I think out of musks, habanolide is fairly noticeable. And it's also at a fairly high concentration to the other stuff in this formula. So I would say that habanolide, that hot iron smell, is definitely one of the main characteristics of the base note, but I think it works pretty well. We've also got cosmone in here, which is another musk. This is a funny one because I think, at least when I go smell it, it's a bit of definitely a unique kind of musky smell. But it's also hard to find the words to describe it. So I'm going to leave that one to you. If you have any cosmone, then you can go and say what you think it smells like yourself. So we've got these musky notes, and then finally we've just got some earthy notes in here as well. So actually let's mark these on here. So at the end we've got some earthy notes. So we've got the patchouli and we've got the clearwood, which is like almost like a light kind of offshoot thing of the patchouli. But really this perfume doesn't smell particularly earthy at all. When you look at the concentration, if you think back to the Trendseeker perfume, which had much higher concentrations of clearwood and of cashmeran, this time we've got very low amounts of these, so you can imagine that what they're doing is just providing some kind of slight supporting element. And it may be that, because when I go and smell this base note, it smells it smells quite unisex, and So I mean, I'm not one to kind of assign gender to smells too much, but I think some people might say that these kind of pink notes maybe make it a bit more feminine, or a bit more floral leaning, or something like that. And one take on it could be that having these amber elements and these earthy elements actually balance it back out. So overall, the thing doesn't really lean too like kind of one way or the other. And it's not necessarily a gender thing. You could also think of it in terms of like freshness and lightness, because earthy things are a bit heavier and you could almost say less fresh, whereas floral or these kind of sweeter things are more kind of ethereal, a bit more fresh, a bit sweeter. So that's kind of why one reason you could say this perfume kind of works well, right? You've got this whole kind of different range of like musky materials in the you've got this whole range of like musky materials in the base. So you've got more kind of powdery leaning musks, and you've got kind of you've got these more like hot iron musks and the cosmone in there as well. So you've kind of created this unique signature of musks, which is nice. That's something you sometimes want to do in a perfume. You want to kind of balance the musk to create your own unique, let's say, signature in the base note. And then it's kind of balanced around it with these different sides. So it's got this kind of like sweeter pink aspect, which I think comes out quite well, and I think that smells quite nice. But then it's also kind of balanced off by kind of a subtle earthy facet and like a subtle ambery facet. And the whole thing, when you put it all together, it just smells very nice, and it just smells very well balanced. Now, that's all I've got to say about these formulas. I do really like these formulas. I do think that it's worth going to make these yourself if you can. I think you'll get a lot of value out of that exercise. And thanks for watching the video. Now, if you did like the video, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel, because this means every time I release a new video, that video will get pushed into your subscription feed, so you'll see it as soon as it comes out. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.